Well, welcome. How's everyone doing? All right, man, what a summer it's been so far. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like my summer was here and it's gone. I cannot believe we're already at the end of July. And it's been pretty cool as a church. We've been going through the minor prophets every single week, and we've been learning about minor prophet after minor prophet. I want to ask you guys a question, though. Do you remember the Staples commercial back in the day? Where, like, if the photocopier got jammed or if the printer got stuck, all you had to do was pull out one of these.
That was easy.
Hit it, and boom, instantly that problem was fixed. Now, imagine if we had that today, right? Just for regular everyday life. Like, you got to get the kids ready and back to school, or you have loads of papers to document. Maybe the computer won't start. Imagine if you just walked around, you hit the easy button, and boom, it was done. Or what if we were to take it one step further? What if there was a button similar to this, but every time you hit it, everything bad in your life disappeared? That health crisis, the overdue credit card bill, that never-ending pile of laundry. Imagine if you were to hit it, and once again, it's gone. Or even better, what if every time you hit this button, everyone bad was removed from your life? See you later, boss. That guy who doesn't return the card at the grocery store. See ya. That mother-in-law.
That was easy.
She gone. And take it easy. She's not dead. Like, she's just gone permanently on a vacation, gone far away. But honestly, man, what if there was really a button that can really get bad, that can really get rid of all the bad stuff? I mean, I'm talking about the child predators, the terrorists, the warmongers. Would you push this button? Would you press it? Now, I could be wrong, but I think partly that's what kind of makes this button tempting, right? Or even the idea of this button. Because there's so much evil in this world, it's hard for us to reconcile. I mean, how could there be so much evil in the world? Especially as Christians, or if you have any semblance of a belief in a loving God. At one point in your life, you've asked yourself, how can evil and a loving God coexist? And maybe you've read up on this, you've studied it, you used theology to wrap your mind around it. But the reality is when suffering, when it hits your home, when it hits your own home turf, this button that we have, it would sound pretty amazing right now, right? Today we're going to look at one of my favorite minor prophets. He's the kind of guy who asks God all the questions we're too afraid to ask. He's asking all the hows and whys. And God, how can you allow this to happen? Why would you allow that to happen? God, what are you possibly doing kind of questions? Today, we're going to be in the book of Habakkuk, probably one of the most fun names to say in the minors. I got to tell you guys a really funny story. Man, I butchered his name severely. So this fall, when we had Thanksgiving service, I remember Jordan was like, hey, dude, you're going to be preaching. And I was like, great. And so Jordan, he wrote this message. I get this message. I rewrote it in my own words. And I run into Jordan's office, and I'm super excited. And I'm like, Jordan, man, I cannot wait to preach from Habakkuk. And Jordan looks at me, and he starts laughing. And he's like, well, man, that's funny. He's like, because you're the only one who's going to be preaching from Habakkuk. And so these guys, Junior and Jordan, they made fun of me for the longest time. Except this week, what I found out is that Habakkuk, it's an Akkadian word. And we really don't know what the pronunciation to it is. And so for all we know, it could be Habakkuk. And when we get to heaven, some of you guys might be surprised. And so this prophet we're going to be talking about today, not only is his name kind of unknown, but a lot about his life is unknown as well. Like, here's some things we do know about Habakkuk. We do know that he was obviously a minor prophet. He was living in the remnant of Judah right before Babylon would come in and take over. And here's a little bit Old Testament history. So Israel, they come to God and they say, God, we want a king. And God says, okay. And so God, he gives them Saul. And Saul, he's good for a little while, but then Saul, he gets jealous and he kind of goes off the deep end. Next, who comes up? We have David. David is a legendary king in Israel, probably the best king Israel ever had. Like, it blows me away when I was in Israel this last November. The way that they talk about David till this day is still mind-blowing. But David, he's a legendary king. After David, you have Solomon who comes. Solomon, he's David's son. He's a wise king, one of the wisest men to ever live, but the problem with him is he's got some lady problems. Then, after Solomon, you have his son who comes, and his son's name is Rehoboam. Now, Rehoboam, he was a little bit too controlling, and so Solomon's servant Jeroboam, he decides to kind of split away, and he takes 10 of the 12 kind of cities in northern Israel. And so you have northern Israel that's run by Jeroboam, and you have southern Israel that's really Judah and Benjamin that's run by Rehoboam. And you guys have to understand, Israel, they don't really have a good track record of kings. So if we were to look at their kings, this is Israel's kings. It says here, kings in blue are good and kings in gray are bad. We see Israel's history, they had a horrible track record of having terrible kings. But then you look at Judah. Judah was a little bit different. Judah had some good kings that would come. And actually, the last king that we talked about was King Josiah. Right? King Josiah, he was this 8-year-old boy. But man, he comes in and he clears out all the temples. He kind of brings the people back to worshiping Yahweh. And for a while, things are going really good. And Habakkuk, he's living under this rule. And it's good for him to see that the false worship house, they're being torn down, and now Yahweh, he's only being worshiped. But one day, King Josiah, he goes into battle, and as he goes into battle, he's shot and he's killed by an arrow. And Habakkuk's like, come on, God. Are you kidding me? Man, if that arrow was a little to the left, he would have been alive. If it was a little bit to the right, it would have missed him completely. But God, you allowed this guy to get hit with an arrow? The guy who restored and brought your people back to worshiping you? And so Josiah dies, and sin becomes rampant in Israel again. And with this mindset in mind, Habakkuk, he starts a conversation with God, and it's really this prayer. And if you jump into verse 1, it says, the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. Habakkuk's complaint. Oh Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? Or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at what's wrong? Habakkuk's like, come on, God. I know you're up there. I know that you're seeing all this. You see these wicked people. Come on, God, are you there? Can you hear me? I'm asking you to intervene. I'm asking you to do something, but all I hear is radio silence. And here's Habakkuk's first question to God. This is his first doubt. God, why aren't you listening? And come on, how relatable is this? God, I've been praying for this, and I've been praying for this, and I've been praying for this, and nothing. And you know what's really confusing to me? I feel like sometimes God answers the small prayer requests in our lives way faster than the bigger ones. Has God ever answered a really kind of maybe stupid little thing in your life? Right, maybe you were praying for a parking spot, and you're in the parking lot, and boom, a parking spot opens. Or maybe you have a headache, right? And you pray, and that headache is gone. One of my favorite stories is 6 years ago when I became a believer. My life was in shambles, if I'm being honest. My finances were horrible. I was going back to school. I was trying to learn how to tithe, how to do this whole Christian life thing. And at that time, I was living with my parents. I was staying with my dad. He would rent me this room for a certain amount of money. But then also one of the things that I had to do is I had to buy groceries every single week, and I had to bring them in. And so one day, I'm on my way from work, and my dad calls me, and he says, Denim, I need you to pick up some groceries. Now, once again, financially, I was strapped. I only had $20 in my bank account. And I said, okay, man, just send me the list of what you need. He sends me these 5 things. I'm like, there's no way this is going to be $20. This is going to be more than $20. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I get to Mariano's, park my car, and I'm like, Lord, man, make these $20 go a long way. Point is, I get into the store. I see these 5 items. I grab them. I get to the cash register. I am not joking. I am sweating bullets. I'm praying like I've never prayed before in my life. I step up to this cash register. The cashier, she comes. She starts scanning these items. By the time she gets to the 4th one, I think I'm about to have a heart attack. Finally, she scans the 5th item. I close my eyes because I don't want to see the total. As I close my eyes, I hear her say, "Sir, your total is $19.99." I open my eyes and I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Your total is $19.99." Like, isn't that crazy? Isn't that nuts how God, he moves sometimes in those ways? But man, if I'm being honest, there's been other times in my life where I've prayed prayers that were a lot more serious. Like, man, prayers for people who are in the hospital who are about to die, prayers for sick kids, prayers for wayward children, prayers against evil. And you've done the same, man. You've prayed for that son, maybe who's strayed away, or for your marriage, or for your spouse, for your kid. And man, God, he just doesn't seem to be answering. Or while I was praying to have enough money to get through Mariano's, that same year, my senior year, there was a kid in our school who got leukemia and he passed away as a senior. And I remember sitting there and being like, man, God, do you really care more about groceries than you do about someone's life? God, are you listening? Are you there? And God answers to Habakkuk 2,600 years ago. It's still the same way that God, he's going to answer us today. Look at verse 5. It says, "Look among the nations and see, wonder and be astounded, for I am doing a work in your days that you will not believe if told." So God, he answers Habakkuk. He says, "I'm answering in ways you do not see, but will shock you." God says, trust me, I hear you. I see what's going on. I care about what's going on. And I have a plan that's going to blow your mind. And I know that this is kind of an elementary principle. But one thing I constantly have to remind myself when I catch myself doubting God or doubting why there's pain and suffering is that I have to remember that God is smarter than me. And I know that's elementary. But so often I come to God and I'm like, hey, God, here's the situation. This is the way I would do it. Now, come on, God, let's take my way and let's go. Let's get going. Like, we got to get through this. But honestly, 9 out of 10 times, I hear God say, Denim, hold on, your plan is really stupid. If you knew the outcome of the plans that you want, you wouldn't choose the plan that you chose. So I'm going to answer your prayer the way you should have prayed if you knew everything that I knew. That's how good God is. I love what Tim Keller said about God. He said, God always gives you what you would have asked for if you knew everything he knew. God, he's answering your prayers, but just because he's not answering in the way that you think he should, or the way that you want him to, that doesn't mean that God is ignoring you. I like to look at God's plans kind of like the backside of a Persian rug. When you look at the backside of a Persian rug, it looks like a mess. But man, then you turn it around and it's this beautiful masterpiece. And so God, he looks at Habakkuk and he says, I hear your prayers, but you might want to sit down because what I'm about to tell you, it's going to shock you. God, he looks at Habakkuk and he says, you know those Assyrians who took over your brothers in the northern part of this country? Well, he says there's going to be another empire that's going to come and slaughter those guys, and now they're going to come and they're going to capture you, and they're going to be called the Babylonians. In verses 6 to 11, it says, for behold, I'm raising up the Chaldeans or the Babylonians, the bitter and hasty nation. They are dreaded and fearsome. At kings they scoff, and at rulers they laugh. They laugh at every fortress, for they pile up earth and take it. You have to understand the Babylonians during this time, they were a powerhouse. They were taking over the known world, and they were not shy about their power at all. They were known for making these huge ramps that would go over fortified cities so that they can get in and slaughter every single person. When they would go into neighboring towns and countries, and when they would capture the kings, they would actually take the kings and keep them in a zoo so that people can come and watch these kings in a zoo. The Babylonians, they were evil, violent, ruthless, and they were coming for Judah, meaning that they were also coming for Habakkuk. And rightly so, Habakkuk, he's struggling with the answer that God has given him. And that brings his next question. In verse 12, he says, O Lord, my God, my Holy One, you who are pure, you who have pure eyes to see, than to see evil and cannot look at wrong. Why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallow up the man more righteous than he? Habakkuk, he kind of looks at God and he says, God, like, whoa, like you're going to use those people? Like, I know I asked you for an answer, but I kind of want a different answer now. Is there a plan B? Is there something else that you can do, God? A way that we don't go into slavery? Because I'd rather take that. See, Habakkuk, he wanted an answer, got an answer, but then wanted a different answer. Sometimes the answer that we receive isn't always the answer that we want, but it's always the answer that we need. But the really bigger picture that Habakkuk is asking is this. He says, God, how can you allow evil? God, if you're holy, if you're eternal, if you're for your people, man, how can you allow evil into this world? And this is an age-old question that you and I have wrestled with. I mean, scholars for thousands and thousands of years have wrestled with. It's that age-old question. If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good, why is there suffering and evil? You've seen evil in the world. You can turn on the news. Without question, you can see evil in the world. I mean, I guess even for some of you, right, something in your personal life, something evil has happened by the way that you've been affected by it. And so you've asked this question. And here are the potential answers for evil and suffering. The first one is atheism. Man, guys, there is no God. This is it. Like, this life right here is all that we have. And once we die, it's kind of going to be like a TV. We're going to shut it off. It's going to go black, and that's it. There's no one coming to save us. There's nothing on the other end. It's this view of like, man, this is all that there is. The next view is finite Godism. God is not all-powerful. Like, God is good, and yeah, God is in control here and there, but the devil and the demons, they still win. And I just want you guys to know that that's the biggest heresy. Because God has won every single battle. Satan has already lost. God, he's never lost a war. He's never lost a battle. He's never lost in rock, paper, scissors. And I can tell you, God, he's not going to lose now. The next one that we see is open theism. God is not all-knowing. Yeah, I know God's good, God's powerful, but he doesn't know the future. He's not in real time with us, so he can't deal with what's coming and what's coming our way. And so God, like, yeah, you're God, but you're not really all-knowing. Or pantheism. God is not all good. The theology behind Avatar, right? This is the yin and yang. God is good and evil, and it all balances out. Or you have Buddhism. And they say that there really is no suffering or evil. It may feel like suffering and evil and pain, but it's not. Pain and suffering are kind of just the last option. And then, finally, this is our last option. Christianity says God is not done yet. Live by faith. This is exactly what God says to Habakkuk. Habakkuk says, God, how can you allow evil? And God responds to him, he says, I'm not done yet. Live by faith. In verse 3, it says, this vision is for the future time, and it describes the end, and it will be fulfilled. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it will surely take place. It will not be delayed, but the righteous shall live by faith. And God answers, I'm not done yet. Live by faith. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Here's what we do know about God and evil, though. God is only good and does not ordain evil. God has chosen to create a real world. God is 100% good and only makes good things. Whatever evil things happened in the news or happened to you, God isn't making any of that happen. He's not the author of sin. God doesn't even tempt us with sin, and no one can blame God for the evil in the world or for in people. But here's the thing. God allows evil. God has created a real world with real choices that have real consequences. When I sit down with people and we talk about this all the time. God, he didn't create robots. God, he created you with a free will. And so you could choose to follow God or you could choose to follow evil. But the problem is when we choose evil, the people around us, they're affected by our sins. But the good news is this. God overcomes evil and uses it for good. There's nothing too bad, nothing that's out of control where God goes, whoa, man, I can't really do anything in this situation. Nothing good can possibly come out of this. No, every single pain, every single ounce of pain and suffering, God, he's able to use that not only to benefit you, but to benefit those around you and to help others. Case in point, for the last 2,500 years, Judah, they would always fall back into worshiping these false gods. Like we see this over and over in the Old Testament, right? They follow God and then they fall away from God. They follow God and then they fall away from God. And it's crazy to me. Did you know that when God, in his loving discipline, when he sends Judah into Babylonian captivity for 70 years, did you know that when they come out, we don't ever have it recorded of them going to worship false gods again? And it's because God was doing something in his people. And yeah, it required suffering, it required hardship, it required for them to see that life without God is really life without anything. And Habakkuk, he starts to understand this. And he's reminded of who God is. And he sees that God, he's been working all the things out for the good of those who love him. And so Habakkuk, he starts to understand this, and finally he's able to breathe, he's able to trust, he's able to worship. Chapter 3 is really one big, long worship song, which is kind of funny to me. Because you see Habakkuk at one point, he's freaking out. He's trying to figure out what God is doing. And he's asking all these questions. God, how can you do this? Why are you doing this? And now Habakkuk, he kind of comes to a place where he says, God, all that I know is that you are in control. Right? Habakkuk, he penned that song before these frauds did. Hayden and Jansen, they're a whole bunch of frauds. Habakkuk, man, he sings this song. He sings this song. And it's Habakkuk's song of faith. All that I know is that, God, you're in control. Habakkuk even said, he said, even though the fig trees have no blossoms and there's no grapes on the vines, even though the olive crops fail and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. Let me translate this for you. He says, though my bank account reads 0, though I just lost my job, though they couldn't find a heartbeat, yeah, I have this chronic pain and it's continuing, though life around me is falling apart, I do know one thing, God, you're in control. And it's incredible. He goes from doubt to dependence, from confusion to confidence, from worry to worship. And so how do we get there? How do you and I get there? How do we take our doubts, our hows, and our whys, and how do we bring them to a place where we say, God, man, I'm going to trust you with this no matter what? What do we do with our whys and hows? And here's what Habakkuk did. The first thing he did, we bring them to God. Doubts are not bad. Doubts don't mean that you don't love God. Doubts don't even mean that you don't have faith. I would actually say that doubts mean that you're taking your faith serious and you really want to dive into what you believe. But there's a big difference between doubt and unbelief. Doubt is saying, God, I really want to believe. Like, man, help me see this so I could see where you're working and how this all comes about. And then there's some people who have unbelief. And unbelief is saying, God, I won't believe. I won't look into this. I won't bring this to the leaders and to the church. I'm done. You know, in the last year, it's pretty awesome. We have a lot of young adults who come through this place. And I've been meeting with a lot of college kids. And this is one of the biggest conversations I have with them. Matter of fact, 3 months ago, I met with this one college kid. And man, we met for a long time. I mean, we met for 3 months, and we would go through the Bible. I answered any questions he had. We looked at all the theological processes of how the Bible came to be. And honestly, after 3 months and after hard evidence, this kid, he looks at me and he says, Denim, I just don't want to believe this. See, there's a big difference between doubt and unbelief. You know, one of the most interesting books in the Bible to me is the book of Job. Job is a story in Scripture where God takes literally everything away from this man. He takes away his wife, his house, his kids, his business. He takes everything away from this man. And he does this in order to show that Job, he doesn't need blessing in order to worship God and to have faith in God. And it's interesting because a good portion of the book is Job just complaining like Habakkuk is. He's just like Habakkuk. He's saying, God, why are you doing this? Why would you allow this? How can this happen? What did I do to deserve this? Why? And he's so confused, no doubt. But in this confusion, he's still doing something. And he's still coming to God, and he's bringing his doubts to God. Because Job, he never stopped bringing his doubts to God. He took his sadness, he took his anger, he took his questions, and he brought them to God. For my married couples in here, one of the worst things is when your spouse is angry at you and they don't even tell you why they're angry, right? Like, man, you wake up, you're walking around the house, they're stomping a little bit louder than they're used to. They're answering in short one-word answers that they never do. You kind of catch that vibe, right? Like, man, if I'm being honest, like, I could tell when my wife is pretty upset with me or when I've done something that's upset her, right? Because she's not talking to me. And you know what I've realized? Like, man, if we don't talk through those things, if we don't communicate, it creates this barrier that really separates us. And I think that's the same thing with God. Like, some of us in this room, we have so many doubts and we have all these questions about God. And here's my thing, like, take those questions, have those doubts, but now take that and go do something with it. Like, come to talk to me, come talk to a pastor. Let's work through these doubts. Because I think what so often happens is a lot of us, we sit on these doubts and man, year after year and years go by and then we become so distant and separate from God. Bring your doubts to God. Second thing, wait patiently for answers. Habakkuk, he said, I will climb up my watchtower and stand at my guard post. There I will wait to see what the Lord says and how he will answer my complaint. In the Old Testament, the watchtower, it was the highest and best view of where you would go to see the enemy if the enemy was coming. And Habakkuk, he says, I'm going to go to the best view of my situation, and I'm going to climb up there, and I'm going to sit in this watchtower, and God, I'm going to see to understand how this is from your perspective. Like, I want to understand it from your perspective. I want to understand it from your point of view. And as we wait patiently for God's answer, this is what God said in Habakkuk 2:3. He says, it seems slow in coming, but wait patiently, for it will surely take place. Man, oftentimes I know in my life, I oftentimes think God is just slow. Like, we really do live in a pretty fast-paced culture. If we don't get something Amazon Prime the next day, we freak out. If we do Uber Eats, and if they're a little bit late, we freak out. We're an on-demand culture. When we want something, we want it now. And God goes, no, I'm not that way. I'm patient, and you're going to have to wait. I love how Peter, one of Jesus' followers, put it. He said this, the Lord isn't really being slow about his promise as some people think. No, he's being patient for your sake. He does not want anyone to be destroyed, but wants everyone to repent. I want you to take that button that we talked about in the beginning. There was a button that can erase all evil. Would you push that button? Here's what I know. I know that I wouldn't want you to hold that button. And I know I definitely wouldn't want you to press that button. Because I know if you were to press that button that you would probably get rid of me. Because at some point, man, I've done some evil. And you probably have too. And if you press that button, that would be a part of that evil that you would get rid of. And so, if me and you are the reason maybe that we don't press that button, can you maybe think that's the reason God hasn't pressed it? There's a lot of people who need to know God. Amen, God, he's being patient because he doesn't want anyone to be destroyed, but he wants everyone to be saved and to repent. As Christians, we believe you and I are the reason that God is slow to push that button. God, he's being patient and he's waiting for us to turn to him. God is slow, he's patient, and when it comes to questions in our lives, we call to him and we wait patiently for him to answer. Our third point, fall back on what you do know. When Habakkuk was struggling, even in his questions, when he was recalling who God was, I mean, look at it, what he says in chapter 2, verse 12. He says, "Oh God, oh Lord, my God, my Holy One, you are eternal. Surely you do not plan to wipe us out, oh Lord, our rock." He says, God, you're eternal. You're over all of this. You see things that I don't see. You know things that I don't. But God, you also made a promise to us, right? And you made a promise that you would make a great nation out of us, that you wouldn't wipe us out. And you're faithful to your promises. Sometimes that's what we need to do. We need to go back and we need to fall back on the promises of God, and we need to be reminded by how good he is. When you have doubts, stop and recall who God is. I love Nanette so much. She's our campus coordinator, but a few weeks ago, Nanette and I, we were sitting in our office and we were just sharing stories of this last year of all the ways God has worked at our campus. And it was unbelievable. I mean, we shared story after story, and at the end of our conversation, Nanette, she just asked me, she said, Denim, do you write these things down? And I was like, no, I don't. She said, man, you should start writing these things down. She's like, how cool will it be one day, man, 20, 30 years from now when we get to go back and we get to open this book and we get to see how God has been faithful. Or you know what's really cool? 6 years ago, Pastor Junior, he got me this book, and it's a prayer journal. And man, for the last 6 years, I've kind of just been journaling prayers in here. And it's just unbelievable because I can open up this book and I can see specifically for people who I prayed for, who are now in this building worshiping God. I can see sometimes where maybe I didn't think God was moving in a season. I got to kind of reflect back and be like, man, God, you were moving in bigger ways than I can ever think or imagine. But there's these times in life where we have to do these things, where we almost build like these little altars where we're reminded of who God is and of his faithfulness. You know, there's sometimes in life when things don't look good, but this is a good time where we bring up these reminders. If we're being honest, God has only showed himself to be faithful to us. And why would he stop now? Next thing to do with your doubts, as you bring them to God, is you recall who he is, and then you trust him no matter what, and you verbalize your commitment. When I got married, when I put this ring on my finger, as many of you did, I made a commitment to my wife, a vow. And the vow was not, Maddie, I'm going to be with you as long as things are good, as long as we got a lot of money, as long as we're healthy, as long as we're rich, as long as things are going good. No, it was a lifelong commitment that in sickness or in health, rich or poor, for better or for worse, this was a lifelong commitment that I was making to her. And being a Christian, it's a lifelong commitment, not just when things are going well in your life, but even when things are falling through the floor. My wife and I often on our anniversary, we'll actually sit down and we'll talk about the commitments that we made to each other. Because it's such a good reminder for my heart. Honestly, another good reminder for me when I have anxiety is I got to open up Matthew chapter 6. And I just got to get on my knees and I just got to pray that over and over again. I got to be reminded God tells us not to be anxious. But there's something about speaking out and verbalizing your commitment to God that solidifies it in our souls. Habakkuk's song, it was out of joy, and he was just verbalizing his commitment. He was preaching it to his own heart, declaring it even when he didn't want to feel it, which leads to our last point. Worship through it. Habakkuk's song is funny to me because he didn't get the answer that he wanted from God, as far as we know. Right? He didn't want his people to be thrown into captivity. He didn't want them to be taken over by the Babylonians. And I bet he still had some hows and whys. But it's really interesting to me. Habakkuk, he pulls out his guitar and he starts to worship. Why? Because he had an answer from God. God said, I'm in control. You can trust me. Habakkuk, he believed that, and then he lived by faith. And you and I, we're even at a bigger advantage because we get to see this in 4K. Like, we get to see the cross. We get to see what God has done on the cross for you and I. I mean, think of Jesus as the disciples. They saw Jesus be arrested, beat, crucified. And come on, you have to be wondering what they were thinking. Like, God, how? Why would you allow this? Why would you allow him to die? How could this happen? And in the most brutal evil brought forth on this planet, this was the pinnacle of evil, and God Almighty, he was hanging bloody on the cross. He was killed by the ones he came to save. And yet, you know what? The most depraved moment of human history was the moment that would bring forth the greatest blessing for humanity. When Jesus came out of the tomb, it was a message to all of us that evil does not have the final say both in this world, but also in the world to come. God says, man, that he's going to make blessings come from it, and all you and I have to do is wait. So cool. When I was a little kid, this is my dad. My dad right there is standing next to me in the middle. This was on our wedding day. But my dad, if you guys don't know, he's a famous musician in Europe. My dad was from Yugoslavia, and so I remember when I was in middle school, he actually took me with him to Europe, and it was sweet. We got to travel from city to city. I mean, he took us, we started in Bosnia, and then from Bosnia, we went to Croatia, and then we went from Croatia to Serbia, and to Montenegro, and then to Italy, and we did it all in a car as we drove around to these different cities. And you know what my favorite thing about this was? My dad, every single time we were done in one city and I was blown away by the culture and the food and the people and the sights, my dad would say, Denim, it only gets better. Like, just wait till we get to the next place. It only gets better. It only gets better. And I remember being this little kid, and I was so excited. And you know what I was thinking? You know what's funny to me? As I was thinking about this, it's kind of awesome because it's really this good picture of what the Christian life is supposed to be like. Like, God, he's taking us somewhere. And yeah, he's taking us to heaven. But even right now in this life, God, he's just traveling with us, right? He's taking us somewhere. And one thing Christians have always believed, I mean, even back with the early church, from Christians being thrown into coliseums with lions to being beheaded by terrorist groups, one thing that Christians have always believed is that God, he's taking us somewhere better. Whatever it is, wherever it is, we know that it will be better. Better for our character, better for our faith, better for the kingdom of God. Now, the car ride there, if we're being honest, it's going to look different for a lot of us. It's going to look different. For some of us, it might be bumpier, might be longer, might be scarier. But at the end of the day, it's your Heavenly Father who's driving. And so you and I, we can sit in the back seat, we can chill, we can be excited, we can be happy, we can be confident that even though we don't know where we're going, it's okay. It's going to be awesome because our Heavenly Father is coming with us. On this side of eternity, I know that you and I, man, we're going to have some hows and whys. I still do. But when you have those doubts, look at the cross. Look at that picture. Look at God's resounding answer to us. I love what Psalm 84:11 said. It says, no good thing does he withhold from those who walk uprightly. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the one who trusts in you. Better is coming. And as we wait for better, we come to God and we remind ourselves who God is, and we trust and we worship him. And that leads to our so what. My question for you guys is, have you verbalized your trust and your commitment to God? Like, honestly, where are you at with this? Like, have you put your faith and trust in Jesus first and foremost? Have you come to this place where you've accepted him as your Lord and Savior? I mean, if you've done that, have you allowed him actually into your life? And I'm not talking about just on Sunday or Saturday when you show up here for church, but I'm talking about every other day of the week. By the way that you love your family, by the way that you love your kids, by the way that you serve those at work, by the way you represent God in the different places that you walk around in, have you verbalized the commitment to him? You know, the scariest thing for me is that, man, so many of us in this life, we just walk through life wasting it. And God, he wants to take your life and he wants to do something far greater with it than you can ever possibly imagine or think. So have you verbalized your trust and commitment to God? I want to give you guys some time right now. Take this minute or so. Just talk to God. Maybe for some of us, it even looks like writing it down. When we start to worship, it might look like raising our hands and saying, God, I put my trust in you. I know that you're in control. So this time is yours between you and God.